Ryan Poston wasn't afraid of strangers. He wasn't hiding from a dangerous criminal. And he wasn't expecting to die. Instead, the person investigators would later focus on was someone much closer to him. A woman who claimed she loved him. A woman who texted him constantly. A woman who, according to friends, struggled to accept when the relationship was over. At first, it looked like a messy breakup. The kind of relationship people get trapped in every day. Arguments. Reconciliations. Promises to change. Then something happened. Ryan began telling people that he was worried. Not about a random threat, but about someone he knew. Someone he had repeatedly tried to leave. Then, on October 12, 2012, 6 gunshots echoed through Ryan's condominium. When police arrived, Ryan was dead. His girlfriend, Shayna Hubers, admitted she had pulled the trigger, but she insisted it was self-defense. The problem? The evidence didn't always match her story, and the more investigators looked into the relationship,
The caller was 21-year-old
the more
Shayna
questions
Hubers,
they had.
and she had just
Was this a
shot her
young woman
on-off
protecting
boyfriend
herself
Ryan.
from an abusive boyfriend? Or was this the deadly end of an obsession that had been building for months? As you watch this case unfold, I want you to keep one question in mind. Do you believe Shayna Hubers was acting in self-defense, or do you think something much darker was happening beneath the surface? Before Ryan Poston became the center of a murder case that would divide public opinion for years, he was simply a young attorney with a promising future. At 29 years old, Ryan was building a successful legal career in northern Kentucky. Friends described him as intelligent, ambitious, and incredibly personable. He had the kind of personality that made people gravitate toward him almost immediately. But what stood out most wasn't his career. It was the way he treated people. Those closest to Ryan often described him as loyal, supportive, and deeply devoted to his family. He was especially close to his father and his 3 younger sisters. To them, Ryan wasn't just a successful lawyer. He was the person they called when they needed help. The person who always showed up. The person they assumed would be around for decades to come. And that's what makes this case so difficult for many people. Ryan wasn't in the middle of a dangerous lifestyle. He wasn't involved in organized crime. He wasn't living a life that seemed destined for tragedy. In fact, in the days leading up to his death, Ryan appeared to be moving forward. He had plans. He had goals. And according to friends, he was finally trying to close a chapter of his life that had become increasingly stressful. But what Ryan may not have realized was that someone else wasn't ready for that chapter to end. And as we'll see, what started as a relationship had slowly become something much more complicated. Something that many people around him were already beginning to notice. The relationship that would eventually make national headlines didn't begin in a bar, at work, or through mutual friends. It started on Facebook. Around 2011, Ryan Poston came across the profile of Shayna Hubers, a college student from Kentucky. She was intelligent, attractive, and academically accomplished. Friends described her as driven, competitive, and someone who always wanted to succeed. On paper, they seemed like a good match. Ryan was a young attorney building his career. Shayna was a bright university student with ambitious plans of her own. At first, the relationship appeared normal. They spent time together. They talked constantly. And like many new couples, things moved quickly. But according to people who knew them, there was one major difference between Ryan and Shayna. Ryan seemed unsure. Shayna seemed all in. Friends would later say that while Shayna appeared to be envisioning a future together, Ryan often looked like someone trying to figure out whether the relationship was right for him. That difference became more obvious as time went on. The relationship developed a pattern. They would break up, then get back together, then break up again. And every time Ryan tried to create distance, Shayna seemed determined to close it. To some people, that looked like commitment. To others, it looked like something else. Because while Ryan was questioning the future of the relationship, Shayna appeared to be fighting harder and harder to keep it alive. And what happened next would transform an unstable relationship into something many people would later describe as an obsession. At this stage, do you think Shayna was simply fighting for someone she loved? Or do you think the warning signs were already there? Let me know what you think in the comments. As the months passed, Ryan and Shayna's relationship became trapped in a cycle that neither seemed able to escape. But while Ryan appeared to be pulling away, Shayna seemed to be holding on even tighter. According to friends and investigators, communication between the two became overwhelming. Text messages piled up. Calls became frequent. And whenever Ryan attempted to create distance, Shayna often found a way back into his life. At first, Ryan tried to handle the situation himself. He didn't want a public confrontation. He didn't want to embarrass anyone. And like many people caught in difficult relationships, he hoped things would eventually calm down. Instead, they escalated. Friends later recalled Ryan expressing frustration about the constant messages and unexpected appearances. Some described him as emotionally exhausted. Others said he seemed genuinely concerned. One of the biggest problems was that every breakup appeared temporary. Ryan would end the relationship. Then the two would reconcile. Then the cycle would start all over again. And with each repetition, the emotional tension grew stronger. From the outside, it looked like two people struggling to make a relationship work. But beneath the surface, something else may have been happening. Because when someone refuses to accept a relationship is ending, every rejection can feel personal. Every disagreement can feel like betrayal. And every attempt to move on can feel like abandonment. For Shayna, Ryan wasn't just a boyfriend. He had become the center of her emotional world. And that made the possibility of losing him increasingly difficult to accept. What nobody knew at the time was that Ryan was beginning to make plans for a future that didn't include Shayna. And when she eventually realized that future was becoming reality, everything would change. If someone continues calling, texting, and showing up after multiple breakups, where do you draw the line between love and obsession? Let me know your thoughts below. By October 2012, the relationship was hanging by a thread. Ryan had spent months trying to create distance between himself and Shayna. Friends later said he seemed frustrated, drained, and increasingly convinced that the relationship needed to end for good. But this time, something was different. Ryan had plans. Plans that didn't involve Shayna. According to those close to him, Ryan was excited about meeting someone new. He had arranged a date with former Miss Ohio USA Audrey Bolt, and for the first time in a long time, friends noticed a sense of optimism in him. To Ryan, it may have felt like a fresh start. To Shayna, it may have felt like the final rejection. And psychologically, that's an important distinction. Because rejection isn't always dangerous by itself. But when rejection collides with obsession, emotions can become unpredictable. The night before Ryan died, Shayna was already emotional. She had called her mother in distress during the early morning hours. Throughout the next day, communication between her and Ryan continued. Meanwhile, Ryan's friends were becoming increasingly worried. Some had seen the cycle repeat itself too many times. The breakups, the reconciliations, the arguments, the constant emotional turmoil. What they didn't know was that this would be the last day Ryan Poston would ever be alive. That evening, Shayna arrived at Ryan's condominium. What happened inside those walls would later become one of the most debated parts of the entire case. The only two people who truly knew what happened were Ryan Poston and Shayna Hubers. And before the night was over, one of them would be dead. Do you think this tragedy became inevitable the moment Ryan decided to move on? Or do you believe there was still a way for both of them to walk away safely? Let me know in the comments. Shortly after arriving at Ryan's condominium on October 12, 2012, an argument began. Exactly what was said between Ryan Poston and Shayna Hubers that night remains unknown. What is known is that the argument ended with gunfire. When it was over, Ryan had been shot multiple times inside his own home. Moments later, Shayna called 911. She didn't deny what had happened. In fact, she immediately admitted that she had shot Ryan. But from the very beginning, she insisted there was an important detail everyone needed to understand. According to Shayna, she had acted in self-defense. She claimed she feared Ryan and believed she had no other choice. For investigators, that explanation immediately became the central question of the case. Because if Shayna truly believed her life was in danger, the shooting could be justified. But if her story wasn't true, then investigators would be looking at something entirely different. As police arrived, they found Ryan dead inside the condominium and Shayna outside waiting for them. At first glance, the case appeared straightforward. A woman admitted to shooting her boyfriend. The only remaining question was why. But as detectives began interviewing Shayna and examining the evidence, they quickly realized this case was anything but simple. Because the more Shayna talked about what happened that night, the more questions began to emerge. And some of those questions would eventually become the foundation of the prosecution's entire case against her. From the moment detectives began questioning Shayna Hubers, they noticed something unusual. Her account of what happened inside Ryan Poston's condominium didn't stay consistent. It shifted. In some versions of her story, Ryan was the aggressor. In others, the details changed slightly: how the struggle began, how the gun ended up in her hands, and what exactly led to the first shot being fired. For investigators, these inconsistencies became one of the most important parts of the case. Because in violent crime investigations, the physical evidence often becomes the silent witness. And in this case, some of that evidence didn't align neatly with Shayna's explanation. Detectives also focused on her behavior after the shooting. Not just what she said, but how she acted. Calm moments, emotional shifts, and the way her story continued to evolve under questioning. To the prosecution, this wasn't confusion. It was contradiction. And contradiction creates doubt. But the defense would later argue something very different. That trauma, shock, and fear can distort memory. And that a person in survival mode may not always recall events in a perfectly linear way. At this stage of the investigation, both interpretations were still on the table. But the case was no longer just about what happened inside that apartment. It was about which version of events the jury would believe. And ultimately, whether Shayna Hubers acted out of fear or intent. Engagement question. When someone changes their story under pressure, do you automatically see it as deception? Or could it sometimes be the result of shock and trauma? Let me know what you think. When the case finally went to trial, the jury had to answer a question that had divided investigators, attorneys, and the public for years. Was Shayna Hubers a frightened young woman acting in self-defense? Or was Ryan Poston the victim of an obsession that had finally reached its breaking point? The prosecution argued that the evidence pointed toward murder. They claimed Ryan had been trying to end the relationship for good and that Shayna couldn't accept it. The defense argued the opposite. They insisted Ryan had been abusive and that Shayna feared for her life in those final moments. After hearing the testimony, reviewing the evidence, and examining the contradictions, the jury sided with the prosecution. Shayna Hubers was found guilty of murdering Ryan Poston. Years later, a legal issue involving a juror led to a new trial. But even after another jury heard the case, the outcome remained largely the same. Again, Shayna Hubers was convicted. And Ryan Poston's family was left with the same painful reality they had faced from the beginning. Ryan wasn't coming back. But perhaps the most disturbing part of this case isn't the verdict. It's how many warning signs appeared long before the shooting ever happened. The repeated breakups. The emotional dependence. The inability to let go. The growing obsession. Looking back, many people now wonder whether the tragedy began months before the gunshots were fired. Maybe even years before. And that's the real mystery at the center of the Ryan Poston case. Not what happened that night, but whether anyone could have stopped it before it ever got that far. What do you think? Do you believe Shayna Hubers acted in self-defense? Or do you think the evidence showed something much darker? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy psychological true crime cases that explore obsession, manipulation, hidden warning signs, and the moments that change lives forever, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the most dangerous clues appear long before the crime itself.